Okay, I think, can you hear me? Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for staying back despite of this big. So, this we'll be talking about the skill demand for the future economy, and we have actually, rather than just a one speaker that you have to listen throughout 45 minutes, there'll be three of us. So Prof. Ng will be doing the second one, and followed by Prof. Yap. All right? Yeah. So we will be taking the question at the end of the session itself, rather than along the way. So perhaps if you have any questions that you want to put up, you should just scan this QR code now, so that as we go along, we will be able to. So there will be a panel discussion at the end, 15 minutes. All right? Okay, so with that in mind, yeah, let's just go on now to talk about the Total WSH approach, the next generation approach to workplace safety and health. Right? Well, I thought it is important at this point in time for me to do a full disclosure, because there is actually a conflict of interest here. Okay? Because Total WSH is our school's baby, and I delivered it. Okay? So I'm going to share. Thanks for the reminder. So I'm going to share without any shame. I try to promote this as much as I can, because the vision for me really, and for the school too, is to be able to see that this Total WSH approach will be used not just for the big companies, but down to the smallest SMEs. All right, so with that away, I can get started. So I thought it'd be good that if I just give you a bit of history regarding this whole thing. So in 2011, the Ministry of Manpower set out a tender to look at how they could integrate workplace safety and health, right? And rising from that, the School of Public Health took on this tender, and then what we did was that we actually studied 30 workplaces involving more than 10,000 workers. So we submitted a report, and that was the end of the story. As academics, that's what we usually do. Yeah. And what happened then was then MOM's responsibility to discharge this. But as we all know, if it's everybody's responsibility, then it's nobody's responsibility. And so, when we saw this happening, we decided that something needs to be done. So in September 2017, I was tasked, I wrote to write a paper to Straits Times, and here we're looking at this aspect about that work safety must certainly include health factor too. Well, arising from that, I got arrowed and was seconded to Ministry of Manpower since February 2018 for the next 3 years. Yeah. And so I was tasked to work out the doctrine for Total WSH and then how we could implement it at the industrial level. So that's the background of this whole thing, and I thought quickly now I just want to take you through this industrial revolution, which actually begins in the 18th century, where we saw in fact Industrial 1.0, where water and steam was the means by which we derive a lot of power, right? And then in the 19th century, there was this electrical energy that came about. And then in the 20th century, what we saw here was electronic speed processing. And then finally, this is where we are today in the 21st century, the Industrial Revolution 4.0, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Yeah. So we see mechanization in the 18th century, we see electrical power in the 19th century, and then there is in the 20th century the electronics part of it, and finally in this part of it I put a question mark there because it's transformation. We are still going on, and in fact none of us are any wiser what is going to be the outcome at the end of it. You know, people are always talking about the good of it, and certainly they are good at it, but I think as the founder and executive chairman of the World Forum in fact in Denver in 2016, he mentioned this. He says that there has never been a time of greater promise or greater peril, right? So let's be remembered that there's always a balance that we need to be mindful of, and that's the reason why we're having this talk, right? So let me just quickly paint for you now the landscape of Singapore, for which I think most of you are familiar with, so I'm not going to belabor on this point. First and foremost, to mention this shrinking workforce due to our declining fertility rate, yeah? Well, as you can see here, this is actually residents' total fertility rate, or what we call TFR, that tracks over time. And the effective total fertility rate that replaces the population should be at 2.1. Okay, anybody want to hazard a guess what is the value that we're having now? Dismal. Yeah. So, oh sorry, yeah, so it's there. Yeah, so now it's really at 1.12. Okay. But that's not all, because we used to hope on dragons to kind of promote it, but even the dragon not seems working. But I think what is worse now is that COVID is going to eat up this, and it's going to become even lower. That's not all, but because in addition to that, there's also the rapidly aging population and workforce. Yeah, and what we're seeing here again, this is the population statistics that in the 1970 it used to be 1 in 31, the ratio, and the elderly here is referred to as 65 or older. And then back in 2015, which is just 7 years ago, it is 1 in 8. And the projection we have now is that come 2030, it's going to be 1 in 4. And that translates to meaning that, well, this was me yesterday, this is me today, and this is me at 80 years old, still working. Maybe not with the university anymore, they may not want me, but then I will still have to be a cleaner or something like that. Because otherwise, how am I going to support the population? Well, that is not the only problem, because the other problem is really the health of the working population is getting worse off than the general population. I don't know whether you're aware of that, but if you've been reading the most reputable journal that all academics should be reading, unfortunately they are not, and it's the Straits Times. So this is the picture that I took in July 2017, where Chichu was taking this picture and saying that at a job interview, where do you see yourself in 5 years? 5 years down the road, I'll be helping to grow the economy while I myself grow fat. And this is true because the average Singaporeans are putting on weight as they enter the workforce, and this is 5 years ago, and things are not getting brighter. In fact, things are getting rounder. More and more of our people are getting fatter, all right? So I think you will probably have seen this in November last year, where the Singapore population study was published. And basically what it's saying here is that the Singaporeans are less healthy with uptake in chronic ailment. Okay? Least you forget and say, so that's Singaporeans, so what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is because more than 70% of our resident population are in the workforce. Okay? Which means that our workforce are really not healthy at all. Okay? So just looking at the National Population Health Survey that was done in 2020, you see here that now 35% of our people have hypertension. That's not all. 23% of them have diabetes, and then obese 1 in 10. But looking at it now, I think you probably see a lot of people who are round. Once upon a time that they were more shapely than that. So these are problems that we're actually facing, and of course binge drinking is going up, chronic disease screening is going down. Yeah. So the health of our working population is not as healthy as you want it to be. Okay? And of course there's the cutting back of foreign workforce, right? Which I'm not going to dwell on it today. So if you look at it and recognizing this whole thing, well, the bottom line is that we will need to keep on our population working for as long as they want to, right? Okay, so at this point in time, I thought it'd be good to just think about what are some of the principal considerations to ensure a productive workforce, which I'm sure most of you would know better than I do. Firstly, I think safety measures will be put in place at the workplace. Okay, of course, depending on the kind of industries that you have. Secondly, I think we need to appreciate the nature of work which is ever transforming. Okay, it's not stationary, we are ever changing. Okay, as someone said, the only constant is change. Okay, so we need to be reticent of that. Thirdly, I give a lot of talk to CEOs and HR people, and they always, when we come to health of your workers, they always say that, oh, the health of the worker is a personal responsibility. Now with PDPA and what have you, medical in confidence I cannot touch. But the health of the workers cannot be only a personal responsibility. And let me just share with you now two illustrations. Because if you look at this, the health of the worker cannot be because of this. So this is just one example that was published in Straits Times of how a particular hotel, came down with the guests who attended the wedding came down with food poisoning, and what they found was that the banquet servers had continued to work while they were ill. So it was actually the waiters and waitresses that were spreading the illnesses. But that's not all. So you see here that health of workers affect work. Could it be the processes, it could be a monetary loss, or it could be reputational. 2015, again from Straits Times, an unwell crane operator was unable to descend from the cabin, the operator's cabin, about 16-story high, and he was rescued by SCDF subsequently. Well, if you think that this is, wow, what else could be more disastrous? Can you imagine this scenario by which this crane operator was hoisting this 50-ton cement, okay, and because of whatever health illness, he may have a heart attack or a giddy spell, and then he drops this to a school below. Can you imagine now the repercussion of it? You know, that the health of the workers, not just affecting worker, but the whole community itself. So this is where I sell the koyo now. In fact, it's not a koyo, you know, it's a panacea for all kinds of safety and health issues at the workplace. So this is what we call the total wish, where what is important for you to recognize is that we are actually looking at work, safety, and health together. Okay, so the key is together, right? Because we need to recognize that there are actually 6 interactions in this of how work, safety, and health are interrelated. And the whole aim of this is that we want to achieve the workers' well-being. Okay? So let me just quickly illustrate for you by an example when we do not look into this, all right? So let's take diabetes as an example because it's so common now, all right? So Mr. Tan has diabetes, which is not well controlled, and as a result of that, he gets frequent MCs. And then to compound the issue further, due to work pressures, he has irregular meals, which then affect his control of his diabetes. So you can see now how work and health are interrelated. And then, because of his diabetes, his blood sugar dropped low, and then Mr. Tan had a fainting spell and fainted and then fractured his leg. And because we know that most diabetics are more prone to infection, so his wound got infected, and then, well, that in fact prolonged the agony of it. But that's not all, because safety lapses not only affect him, but it could actually cause injuries or hurt others, okay? And it could also be a reputation loss, which I illustrate for you early on. And of course, if Mr. Tan works for a long period of time, I'm sure as most of us do, and working from home does not help, then you end up getting pain over the neck, which is actually a very common musculoskeletal problem due to poor posture. Okay, so I just want to show you now the converse of it. You know, when you look at work, safety, and health together, that basically what is happening now is that because even though Mr. Tan has diabetes, it is well controlled because the company has a chronic disease management program in place, he does not take frequent MCs. And because the company recognizes that work could have contributed to it, they actually put into place this is what is called RM 2.0. This is a risk management implementation program which will address this issue. But I'm not going to go into details of that. But because his diabetes is well controlled, you will see that he basically would actually minimize injury at the workplace. All right? And then, of course, we all know that strong safety habits can reinforce strong discipline, and so it translates into a healthier lifestyle. And then we could go on to talk about the other things. Okay, so I just want to move on now to say first and foremost that if you're interested in this program, you know, MOM is so generous that it's going to give it to you free. Okay, of course, if you belong to the Cheng Hu one, you can't, right? But if you have a private enterprise, you could actually do this. And in this itself, this is how the Total Wish program is about. In fact, I started it in February 2022, and I understand the uptake is not so great. Maybe because I'm not there to whip them anymore. But that joke aside. All right. So if you want to know more detail, in fact, you could just take on this website itself, and all the details are there. Or if you don't even want to take this, what you could do is just do a Google search on Total Wish itself, and those things will be freely available to you. So I want to encourage you to do that. There is a lot of money in it, but it's not the money, because having gone through the program for the last 2 years, I realized that actually a lot of benefit to it, especially for the smaller companies that are really tight in budget. And if you allow me now, just one more koyo, Yeah, and that is that if you're interested to find out more about this implementation of the Total WSH program itself, you may want to scan this QR code because the school also does conduct this course itself and is heavily subsidized by the SkillsFuture Fund. Okay, so in fact we have conducted probably 3 already, William? Yeah, we've done 2 already, and each time there were about 20 odd people attending. So we're running the next course in October, right, if I remember correctly. All right, just feel free to do that. Prof. Ng and myself will actually be conducting this course. Okay, so with that in mind, this is the logo. The MON keeps and says healthier workforce in a safe workplace. And that's the same logo that all of us who are interested in workplace safety and health should really be embarking. All right. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass the time now to Prof. Ng, who will continue with the second part on workman's injury and compensation.
Thanks. Keep the questions coming in. We'll be taking the questions at the end of all 3 speakers. Okay, so my portion, I know it's late in the evening, right? We're going to get a little bit of interaction with the audience as well. So I will be asking you all some questions. But what I'm going to talk about really is a little bit about workman injury compensation in Singapore. Just to give you some ideas of what it does and actually what are some of the common pitfalls that you all may not have thought about. A little bit about myself, so the perspective of where I'm coming from. I'm actually an occupational medicine physician. So I deal with worker health. And that's where I go to, you know, we all say the 鸟不生蛋的地方, right? Tuas, Loyang, where we look at hazardous industries and, well, workers who get injured. So, compensation for workers who get injured is something that is not new to Singapore. We followed the trend from the West, and the first iteration of this law was in 1975. And then since then, year on year, there have always been changes. And the most recent iteration is the Work Injury Compensation Act 2019. Okay, so if you want to read the act itself, that's free on the internet. That's the version you want to look at. And briefly, what does it do? It provides compensation for workers that are injured. Yes, but what does it pay for? Essentially, it covers 3 things. Firstly, it covers death and permanent incapacity. So if you have a permanent injury of some sort, permanent disability, and this permanent disability need not be total. Oh, sorry. Jump one. Right. This permanent disability need not be total incapacity. So based on that, you can get different amounts of compensation. So for death, minimum is 76,000, up to maximum of 225,000. They have a calculation for it based on earnings. Similarly, for permanent incapacity, there's a minimum and a maximum, as well as a percentage. So yes, if you are paralyzed all 4 limbs, you're nearer to 100%. If you lost 1 finger, there's a certain percentage that you will get for that. You also can get cover for medical expenses, which we'll touch on a little bit, and wages as well. So, who pays for the compensation? So when a worker gets injured, who is actually paying? Simply, the company pays. It's the company that's liable, not the taxpayer. However, most companies usually will have some form of insurance. So the term is WICA insurance, which will cover the claims. So my first question to you guys is WICA insurance compulsory by law? What do you all think? Those who say yes, it's compulsory, raise your hand. The rest not sure. 2 in the corner. The rest no or not sure. Okay, it's a little bit of a trick question because the answer is, well, yes and no. Are you zooming in the slides because we're missing portions of the slides? You all have zoomed in on the slide, right? Because the bottom part of my slide is missing. Can you come back out on the slide a bit? Sorry about that, because or else you can't see the part at the bottom. Suddenly, you all went in and zoomed in. Okay, anyway, while they're trying to fix that, the idea is that for all manual employees, it is compulsory. And for non-manual employees earning less than $2,600, it's compulsory. So if you have an office assistant who's earning less than that, a secretary that's earning less than 2006, it is compulsory to get insurance for them. So now you're thinking, wait a minute, why is it insurance is compulsory like that? Well, the idea is really about the protection of the most vulnerable workers. You don't want a situation whereby you have a death or an incident, the company is awarded, to pay $200,000, and they say, oh, we can't afford this, we're going to fold the company, we're going bankrupt. Then the worker doesn't get anything. Right? So they protect the worker in that way by mandating insurance for all manual workers, regardless of pay, and for non-manual workers up to 2006. In reality, in Singapore, actually, most companies will take insurance because they get sold as across the whole company. But in theory, you can actually say, yeah, my CEO, I don't want to cover him. If anything happens to him, company will pay. Right? You can actually take that stance. Yes, there we go. Yay, we got the correct sizing for the slide now. Okay. Let's look at a few simple scenarios. Scenario 1. Your maid falls at home and breaks her leg. Is this compensable under WICA? Those who say no, raise your hand. 1, 2. The rest say yes. 3. Okay, this is the easy one. Yes, this is not compensable under WICA because your home is not actually considered a workplace. That's the reason. So in a way, in order to fill that gap, there's actually a different act, the Employment of Foreign Manpower Regulations, that covers the fact that you need to buy medical insurance and accident insurance for your maid. But they are not actually covered under WICA for compensation. Okay, that was the easy one, huh? Okay, let's try this. An office assistant is making coffee in the staff pantry when she spills boiling hot water on her thigh. She requires skin graft surgery and 4 weeks of medical leave. Is this compensable under WICA? Those who say yes, raise your hand. Most say yes. Some firmly say no, this is not compensable under WICA. It is. It's compensable under WICA. So all genuine injuries are covered even if the worker is at fault. So this is a no-blame compensation. And even if not doing a work task. So in an extreme example, right, you can have the CEO come in and say, hey guys, we won this contract. And you jump onto your table and celebrate, and then you fall off and break your leg. You will be compensated under workman injury compensation. Okay, so all genuine injuries at the workplace, the only caveats are things like violence. You go and fight with a fellow worker, yeah, those are not covered. But all other genuine injuries are covered. What about this one? An elderly worker is rushing up the stairs of the office or factory when he has a heart attack. Is this compensable? All those who say yes, raise your hand. Wow, this one, the back row a bit more tentative, not sure. Ma'am, what do you think? Compensable? Yeah, okay. This one is again another possibly yes. Okay? As long as the worker was doing something either physically or mentally stressful, compensation may be awarded. But the caveat here, this is not 100%. There are detailed criteria, and MOM will arbitrate this. What the learning point here is that the common pitfall is to assume that all these complications of chronic diseases, i.e. a heart attack, cannot be claimed under WICA. So they don't report this to MOM. So the learning point is actually do report to MOM, let them run their algorithm through to decide whether it is claimable or not under WICA. Okay, 4, 5, and 6, kind of related. So let's do 4 first. A worker is in a bus that the company charters to bring them from the MRT to the factory. The bus has an accident and the worker breaks his arm. Is this compensable under WICA? All those who say yes, raise your hand. 1. The rest is like, no. 2. Okay, Sheila is thinking, yeah, this sounds like it might be. Okay, we'll come to this. What about this one? A worker is in a taxi coming to work. The taxi has an accident and the worker breaks his arm. Is this compensable under WICA? All those who say yes, raise your hand. Okay, again, the same 2. Third related scenario. An office worker is asked to deliver some documents to a client. He takes a bus to the client's office, public bus, SBS. Along the way, the bus has an accident and the worker breaks his arm. Is this compensable under WICA? All those who say yes, raise your hand. Wow, this one even more confident. Okay, let's look at the 3 scenarios together. The first scenario is the classic one and is written actually in clear inside the MOM guidelines for this. If you are in company transport coming to and fro from work, it's considered an extension of the workplace, and therefore it is compensable under WICA. However, coming to and fro from work on public transport is not considered part of the workplace. So MRT, normal bus, normal taxi, coming to and fro from work would not be compensable if you get injured during that journey. And basically only when you step through the gate of your factory or workplace, then you become compensable for anything that happens after that. The third scenario is slightly different because you are considered on official duty at that point in time. You're no longer just traveling to and from work. I have ordered you to go somewhere. No matter how you do it, take a boat, take a bus, take a plane, I fly you to KL to deliver something to a client, you get injured in that journey, it is compensable because the entire duration you are considered on official duty. Let's look at this. A foreign construction worker has serious injuries at the workplace, and after 3 weeks in hospital is just discharged with 6 months of hospitalization leave. In order to not incur further WICA claims, the company decides to terminate employment and send the worker back to his home country. So they do this immediately after the 3 weeks. Okay? Once they see that this guy is going to be away for 6 months, okay, we will sack him, send him back to his home country. Has the company successfully dodged their WICA liability? Those who say yes, raise your hand. Okay, this is where you say no, can't be right. Okay, so what actually happens in this scenario, and this I've actually advised companies before, who think that, oh, you know, the person's going to be away for too long, I will just sack them and they'll be fine, right? I just pay for their medical up to now. Not true. So under WICA, what essentially happens is that they look at the time of when you got injured, where you got injured, meaning which company you were under employment, And that company is now liable for the next 1 year. Okay, up to 1 year or up to $45,000 for medical expenses, regardless of employment status. That means you don't have to be employed by the company. The case has been lodged with MOM. Wherever you are, you can go back to your home country, right? MOM will still process the claims accordingly and will still charge back to the original company that you were working for when this happened. A lot of times, I tell the company that, guess what? You are also liable for the pay. So there's no point sacking him. And you are liable for the first 60 days of the HL for full pay and additional HL up to 1 year for the rest of that 1 year at 2/3 pay. So if most of these injuries are manual workers, which means that they all have insurance. So the company actually doesn't lose anything out of pocket. And once they realize this, then they realize, okay, there's no rush to send this worker away, right? Because ultimately, a lot of the cost becomes recoverable through the insurance. And in a way, they also slightly become more compassionate after that. Right, so now this is my one cell koyok slide, right? What I've just spoken about today is just one small snippet of our Singapore healthcare system. We actually conduct 6 half-days course, which is 20+ hours, looking at the entire Singapore healthcare system. Our funding, RHS mechanisms, workplace health, WICA, all these components, even including digital health, are looked at and introduced inside this system for people who work in healthcare, who work in pharmaceuticals, who work in related industries, who want a broader overview, right? So rather than going super in-depth in one single topic, we give a broad overview so you understand the big picture of the Singapore healthcare system. Next run is next year. So if you're interested, take note of this particular email, okay? eling.c@nus.edu.sg. Right, and so for the last segment, I'll pass over to Professor Jason Yap.
Thank you. Hi, thanks Olive. Thanks, Yutong. It's been a long day. I won't take too long. Most of you would have been reading the papers and hearing things about healthcare SG and what is healthcare SG? What's the thinking behind it? So we're going to be running a program on population health, which is basically the scientific domain that's behind that. But let me introduce you to what the concepts are. Let me just, wrong direction. Okay, so, all right, Witong did this, so I'll do this as well. I'm a medical doctor, public health physician. I've been working for 35 years. Accidentally ended up in the NUS about 7 years ago. My main job now is actually, I'm not an academic in the sense of doing research, that kind of stuff. My main role is about figuring out how we can use public health to try to improve things out in the real world right now. So if you look at this slide, this is a slide that shows the life expectancy over a lot of years. Singapore starts off somewhere about, here you are. Okay, so that's Singapore over there. And you can see, to make it even clearer, I put little bubbles over there, and you can see that Singapore's over here now with the 80-something. Those of you who had the medicine talk earlier on, there was cause for celebration because we're #1 now in the world, the longest living country. We started off over here, just under 60 years of age. That's somewhere in maybe the late 40s, right? And we have been improving tremendously. Now the question is, why have we been doing so well, right? Today's session is about the care economy. We're talking about healthcare, social care, about how to look after people better, right? And very important, for example, Sining and Witong have shared with you on the workplace and so on. But the thing is that in one way of looking at it, whenever someone comes into the care economy, we have already failed. Because the road traffic accident that we have to deal with in a hospital, if only there wasn't an accident in the first place. The lung cancer patient who comes in, if only he had been advised and convinced to stop smoking. So the healthcare economy is a sign of failure in our health national level. So if, in terms of how we are dealing with the whole population. So if you look at it this way, then the real reason why we have been really improving all the while, there have been quite a few studies done. There was one study in that compared the English men from 1880 to 1850 to 1850 to 1950, or 100 years, and they found that the lifespan increased greatly as well, similar to this. And they tried to figure out why that is so. And the estimate there was the credit going to healthcare was about 7%, only 7%. The rest of it was because they got more affluence, there was greater economic development, there was better food safety, there was road safety, a lot of other things all in place, right? So the real benefit to the real reason why we are living longer these days is not because we have better healthcare, because healthcare very often hits us towards the end of our lives. They're slowing it down, it is true. But the biggest reason why we live longer, right, is because of better things outside healthcare, which you might call public health, but it's beyond that as well. It includes economic growth, education, better transport systems, and so on. Right. Now, if you look at it that way, then it could be even better, right? So I've took this from the EDB's tagline that Singapore is a great place to work, live, and play. Healthcare is about helping people to work, live, and play. I mean, that's ultimately all our goal. And in order to do that, we need to have health and wellness. But in order to do that, we need to take care of what we call the biomedical determinants of health. What that means is that COVID-19 is a virus that we're trying to get rid of, right? Earlier on, we talked about the workplace injuries. It's about the dangerous workplace environments and so on, right? It's for people with lung cancer, as I mentioned, it's for cigarette smoking. So those are the biological and medical reasons why we lose our health. But the biomedical determinants are influenced by another layer of things called socio-ecological determinants. And you find that, for example, people may not, they may be obese. Why are they obese? Because they're eating a lot of carbs, they eat fast food and so on. But why do they do that? Because they don't know any better. Health literacy is a big problem. Because that's the cheapest food around them. Because even if they wanted better food, they can't get it, or they can't afford it, or it's too far away. So those are the social issues. So you find that a lot of problems that we have in healthcare, we spend a lot of money trying to repair things that could have been prevented if some other things were taken care of. You have an old person who is in hospital, ends up in hospital because they have a hip fracture. Why? Because there's no one at home. But the person's hungry, he needs to eat, he goes down to the coffee shop, he's unsteady, he falls, breaks his hip. Now, how do we prevent that? We can't reinforce everybody's hips. That's the biomedical response, right? What we should be doing is to make sure that there are caregivers, that there are people around, that there may be food delivery for them, right? And of course, if they were healthier, they had muscle mass, they'll be less likely to fall. If they fall, they'll be less likely to break their hips. So those are the social, societal, as well as the ecology that they live in. But that's not the end of the story. There's another layer behind that, which is the commercial determinants of health. I mentioned lung cancer. Think about it. Why do people smoke? Those who smoke, they smoke. Bottom line is they're addicted. But the smoking industry is the only industry in the world that actually kills its customers. But when it kills their customer, what do they have to do? They have to get new customers, right? But you find that there are very few people, generally speaking, if you're above 25, you don't start smoking in great measure, right? At most, after 25, social pressure, you stick a tool here and there, but you don't take it up as a lifetime thing. People who start smoking start below 25. So the tobacco industry's marketing is directed towards the young people. Menthol, capsules, right? If they were allowed to, colorful stuff and so on, right? Jazzy music. So that's the reason why a lot of measures have been put in place to try to reduce those things. So if you want to look after the health of people, it's actually a long chain back. There are a lot of other things that can be done. So if you want to work, live and play, conceptually, what we have to do is to be as healthy as possible for as long as possible, and obviously as affordably as possible as well. How do you prevent ill health? In public health, we like to talk about the 3 preventions. The first prevention is prevent people from getting sick in the first place. The second one is if they do get disease, let's find it early and treat it early, right? And the third level here, right, is to, when people do get sick, manage it well, prevent complications, give them a good life, and at the end of life, there'll be palliative and a dignified exit. Now, if you want to do those things, you find that there are a lot of things that we can do. And if you, so you go, this is, you can vaccinate against stuff, you have health promotion, health screening, and primary care. So this is what the healthcare side of things do. But notice that that's the orange column, is directed towards the biomedical determinants of health. What are we doing one layer back? And here is, well, there's a lot of things. There's income, work security, and so on. And maybe we should go more into legislation to prevent advertising. We have to give better information to people, and so on. Most of traditional healthcare is in this space where we are we were actually focusing on tertiary prevention. Right. So there's some screening as well. But by the way, for secondary prevention, notice that breast self-examination is not done by any healthcare organization. It's done by the person themselves. So secondary prevention is not just a professional's job. People can do for themselves as well. What we would like to see, and this is the big paradigm shift, right? That is basically like taking over much of the world. It's the idea of population health. In other words, we don't wait until you get sick and then you come to us, or you get sick and we say, why are people getting sick? Let's do something about it. And we actually bits and pieces we do here and there. What we want to do is to have this idea, this was the original definition that kicked off this whole thinking about 20 years ago, about looking at health outcomes of the entire population, thinking about it and say, what is making the difference, and directly from there work backwards. So hospitals carry on, but we don't think about what the hospitals are doing, or the clinics, or all the healthcare professionals. We look at what's required in the population, and then we go backwards. So notice that the framing today where you have is healthier SG, healthier Singapore, not healthier individual Singaporeans or special groups of people, or worse, not better healthcare services. Not better healthcare services that we can provide, the best hospitals, the best clinics, and so on. It's about the individual people in the population and making them healthier. So, it's a little sluggish. Okay, never mind. I'll just move on. I was going to go through it. So basically, what we're having here is a fundamental paradigm shift. This is clinical care. This is how doctors have always been trained, nurses have always been trained. This comes from a Chen textbook where you can look, you can see they're looking at the individual, we look after them. There's a focus on making sure that focus on individual patient, right? It's patient focused, but you have got to be sick first. The change here, right, is to move make a transition to a whole different idea, where we start off with the whole population. When we say population, what's our disease burden? What is the biggest problems that we have? Cancers, yes. Then, okay, one good example. Let's take cancers. We've got cancers. How do we reduce cancers? Breast cancer is a major issue in the country. Right? Rather than it becomes something that some group of people have to do, that becomes a national priority. We want to see everybody, every single person screened for every cancer, for every health problem that's necessary, that's common, based on evidence, and we can move on from there. So then this is so we are starting off to reframe the thinking. Now, I think one of the challenges we have is that although the Ministry of Health has been very clear that they want to move to a more population health-based approach to healthcare management, not doing the best we can, everywhere we can, anytime we can, but rather to say, to do what's really, really important for the greatest benefit and for the least, to manage the resource use, the cost, right, is a transition in thinking. But many of the things are still being done by the people, right? I had a friend a long time ago who was, as a mother, she had a session with the politicians, and now all the mothers complaining about education system. And the politician at the point was saying, yeah, you want to change the education system, I agree with you. But the problem is the current system is run by the current people. I need to change the current people's thinking first before I can change the education system for the students. So that's the same case we have found today. So this program that we are going to be introducing is about it's a population health short course, and I'm going to click through all of this. And the basic idea behind this, right, is to be able to think through from the population's perspective all the way back to what's required on the ground, right? It's useful for people in work doing policy, it's for people not in policy, because you have to understand how the policy people are thinking as well, right? We have to move away from this is what I do, help me do it better, right? So going back to the issue of, for example, tobacco seed. Okay. The real indicator that you should be looking at, right, is the number of young people under 25 taking up smoking, right? Today, if you look at newspaper reports, what you see, how successful our smoking cessation programs. Smoking cessation programs, relatively few people actually participate in it. And many of them, if they start later, right, damage already done already. Right? But we are allowing young people to carry on into it, to start taking up smoking. So these are the objectives. The program structure is a 3-day program, and it's a 3 half-day program. And what happens is that the first day, we try to understand what we mean by population health. And like I said, it's a major paradigm shift, right? Doing what we used to do is not going to help us move forward. We have to stop and think about what we did and unlearn some of the natural stuff that we're doing. So we start off by understanding the health of the population. Then we have to figure out how to design and approach the national program to it, and then we have to implement it. Again, implementing is not, it's a different approach to it, because it's, you have to think differently, design differently, and then implement and monitor differently as well. Okay, so I'm one of the leaders for this particular module. Prof. Lee Chen En is the Deputy CEO in SingHealth, and he's very experienced in this area. So between the two of us, we hope to run the program. The program is going to be probably somewhere in November, so watch out for the flyer. That's it. I think there's time. Yeah, questions from anyone? Oh, excellent. If there are no questions from those over here, then we can call it a day. It's a day. All right, thank you.